Hans Steyer, Viraj Puri, Philippe Karadec, Naomi Bauer, and Hervé Oudré. Thank you very much.
Hello? Okay, it's working now. Hi, everyone. Thank you for sticking around for our panel. We had a little bit of an exodus there, but we're here today to have a very important conversation about how the food sector can impact sustainability change and meaningful change. My name is Ariel Lauren Wilson. I'm the editor-in-chief of Edible Manhattan and Edible Brooklyn. And I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves, starting here with you, Hans.
Hello. I'm Hans Steyer. I work in Fair Trade America. As you can tell from my funny accent, I'm from Chile. I work with a great team, and some of my team members are here. And I work in Fair Trade, which is a non-profit organization, which I'll tell a little bit more later. And what makes me really proud is that 50% of the decision-making of that NGO is the farmers we work with and we work for. I wish they were here instead of me, but I'll try to bring to you as much of their realities as I can. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Viraj Puri. I'm the co-founder and chief executive of a company called Gotham Greens. We are a sustainable agriculture company headquartered right here in New York City in Brooklyn. We've been in business for about 7 or 8 years, making us a startup, and we really focus on controlled environment agriculture, which is, as the name implies, a way to grow food in a controlled environment using fewer resources. So we're a consumer company whose products are sold in supermarkets and across food service in many parts of the United States.
Hello, everyone. My name is Philippe Karadec. I'm in charge of public affairs and sustainable development for Danone North America. So some of you know our products. You've enjoyed some of our yogurts, and we also have a lot of organic milk, organic products under the Horizon organic brand, as well as some plant-based beverages such as Silk. Some of you know those, and obviously our famous bottled water products such as Evian.
Hi, I'm Naomi Bauer. I'm the head of sustainable business for Pernod Ricard. I'm sure many of you know our products too. We are a French wine and spirit company, and we own brands that are not only French, like Ricard, the one you must know, but also Absolut Vodka, the Glenlivet, and many other wine and spirit from everywhere in the world. And we recently launched a new strategy on sustainability, so I'm very happy to be here.
Good afternoon. My name is Hervé Oudré. I was actually born in a hotel and raised in a hotel, worked in hotels for 40 years. And Confucius said, we have 2 lives, and the second one starts when you realize you only have one. So I realized that about 1.5 years ago and started my own consulting business in sustainability. I was a very ardent advocate of sustainability in my trade in the hotel industry for 15 years. So I'm thrilled to now encourage my peers as well to do the same.
Well, thank you all for joining us here today. So I want to treat this as a conversation between all of you as well, and I'll kind of just jump in and referee where I'm needed. But I think something that's come up a lot already today that is a good way for us to start too is to talk about how sustainability makes business sense. And we've discussed that a little bit, but does anyone want to jump in there and start answering that question? I see you grinning, Philippe. Would you like to start?
Well, I think the beginning speakers were right on target, and certainly I related very much to a company like ours. For us, we really take a overarching perspective on this. It's part of the Danone DNA. Some of you know about our dual project, which started back in 1972. But we go all the way from the farmers and the suppliers, and we were just discussing about the fact that we source cocoa, we source milk, we source soybean, we source all kinds of things like that. So at the farmer level, but also in our plants and the energy that we use to make all these products, pasteurize the milk, etc. But also at the packaging that we produce to bring those products over to you all in a safe way, because that's the most important thing that a package provides is safety. And then finally, also with regard to how the consumer does dispose of the products that are remaining or the packaging. So all these things we take very great care. And the last but not least, that was mentioned this morning by the gentleman from BNP, our investors. We're a publicly traded company. So we're quite interested in making sure our stock price is appreciated by the investment community. So that is also very important for us.
Hans, would you like to elaborate? Or?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yes, as our hostess mentioned today, at least 65% of the younger at my age, younger generation is concerned about where their products, their food comes from, and how and where do their clothing come from, and many other goods and services they consume. Now, it also makes a lot of sense, as we have spoken, for companies to be sustainable in the sense of ensuring that they will have availability of commodities in the future. But in order for that to happen, our take and my take, very strong take, is that sustainability starts and ends with the families that produce those goods. So whenever we speak about sustainability, and I asked our moderator to please cut me short when I get too enthusiastic about this. Thank you very much. The point is, at times we speak very in abstract terms about the supply chain, and if we forget the people and the families behind it, if those people are not living well, as regrettably it's happening in lots of our commodities like coffee and cocoa, those people are living very poorly. Their kids are living very poorly. Their kids won't continue farming. Just for you to have an idea, the average age of a coffee grower is about 60 years old. They won't farm, and they will migrate to cities, and we know all the impact that has on urban poverty. So long story short, it makes a lot of sense, and I hope throughout this conversation we can open our eyes and remember the people behind it.
Certainly.
I think sustainability is really going to be less of a choice, but more of a necessity. Just a few weeks ago, there was a very dramatic and stark UN document that came out that hundreds of global scientists worked on, which encompassed research from thousands of reports highlighting biodiversity and the extreme loss of biodiversity, which is flora and fauna across the world, which is expected to have a massive impact actually on human civilization. So it's not just, a rare butterfly or a charismatic, big animal like a Bengal tiger that's going to go extinct, but really all those ecosystem services that the environment provides us in terms of clean air, clean water, food production. So for the first time, scientists and experts are really raising the alarm bells about human civilization in 2050 might look very, very different from the way it is today. So this is less about now corporate social responsibility and, coming up with some recycling programs. This is really human civilization. So not to be a buzzkill of this very nice event we're having today, but I think the stakes are high, and I think it's only a matter of time that consumptive industries like us on the food and beverage side, we produce a lot of food and beverages to nourish people, but we also use a lot of resources, and I think we really need to be focusing on using fewer resources to produce more.
Yeah, I agree, and it's true that when we speak about sustaining a business, if we think about the brand Martell, for example, that we have in our portfolio, this brand is 300 years old. But now, with climate change, the grapes are really losing their quality. The acidity of the grapes is higher, the sugar, we have a shorter harvesting window as well. So we don't know what's the future of brands like cognac or champagne. So it's making business sense to actually fight climate change, and we're working on a research program in cognac to actually develop new breeds of vines that are going to be climate change adapted and also disease resistant not to use pesticides. So we think if we want to sustain our business, we need to change our practices.
And in the hotel industry, it's almost the same. I'm happy to hear Hans talking about the people, because it's a people's industry, and it's customers and employees, and it does make sense for us as well to really implement a very serious, very genuine sustainability strategy. You can increase your revenue. Actually, you should know that 80% of our corporate clients do ask for our sustainability strategies, and they require that in their RFPs. So it's very important, otherwise you may not get the client. It's very important as well to reduce your cost. When I arrived, I used to manage the Barclay Intercontinental for 10 years here. When I arrived here in 2009, I was, of course, very specific with the engineers, and we really watched the energy or the electricity bill, actually, and we were able in 5 years' time to reduce the bill by $400,000 by the end of the fifth year, just by focusing on the waste of electricity that we had in the consumption electricity that we had in the hotel. You know, customers, of course, are not as attentive when they're in the hotel. Maybe they leave the light on, they leave the air conditioner on, they just leave the showers on, and all these things do make sense for us to really pay attention. There's another part as well that we may talk later on about, which is the risk management as well. It's important. So a good sustainability strategy can help reduce or mitigate your risks. Therefore, you can reduce as well your insurance costs. So it's very important to look at it from a holistic point of view as well. And it does help, finally, I would say, to retain your staff. And the staff is usually very, very impressed with what you do. I'm talking again about a hotel, but as well in big companies. And you can reduce up to from 25 to 50% of your hiring costs. And then you can increase your engagement, employees' engagement by 7 to 10%.
Yeah, before we go to the next question, I think a really good point to make about the food sector in general is that your all supply chains are on the front lines of climate change, right? I mean, you're going to be some of the first affected in many of this, and already are. But kind of building on what you said, Viraj, about taking this out of the abstract, can we give some specific examples about how your organizations are measuring sustainability and what meaningful change looks like?
Absolutely. So for those of you who don't know, our company is primarily in vegetable production, primarily salads, leafy greens, fresh culinary herbs, things of that nature. And these are crops that at least in the United States, are primarily grown in a few counties in California and Arizona, essentially in deserts. So we are irrigating deserts to basically grow leafy greens, which are 98% water content, and then we're shipping that product cross-country, cross-continent to reach urban consumers across the United States. So there's a lot of water, there's a lot of fossil fuels in the transportation, and ultimately we're dealing with a highly perishable commodity which spoils very easily and leads to food waste. So now all that input that's gone in, the land, the labor, the water, is now actually going to landfills where then it's generating methane. So it's a supply chain that is quite complicated, but quite inefficient as well, and also has a lack of transparency and traceability. So our solution is to grow these commodities using fewer resources in closer proximity to large marketplaces. So it's a decentralized production approach. So we have greenhouses in the nation's largest cities, New York, Chicago, among others, and so then the fresh product is grown using 98% less water, 70% less land, less chemical inputs, and then it's delivered to a supermarket or a restaurant within a few short hours, so there's less food waste. It's sort of not the answer to global farming, but I think it is a solution, and the way we measure it is really through water savings, land savings, and less wastage. So a lot of our supermarket customers report less waste and higher sell-through of our products compared to commodity products that often have to travel thousands of miles to reach consumers. And then the last point is around traceability and transparency. We've had a number of food safety scares in this country, specifically in our category, around E. coli, salmonella, and other plant diseases. And it's very difficult to trace where those things are coming from. And our model of highly decentralized, controlled environment production provides a lot more transparency in that supply chain, which ultimately increases consumer trust. So if our consumers trust us and they also know that we used fewer resources, we think that's a recipe for brand loyalty.
Yeah, excellent. Anyone else?
Yeah, we also use those metrics thanks to the reporting we do annually with all of our affiliates across the globe. But we also look at employees' engagement. And you were saying that employees are key, and for sustainability they are. So every 2 years we do an engagement survey, and we measure how employees are perceiving our sustainability efforts everywhere. And the results are very, very good, so that's why it's motivating us to continue.
Yeah, for us, we do also every other year a huge survey for the 100,000 Danone people in the world. The other piece for us is how do we measure success? And measuring success for us is twofold. One is making sure that we take actions that are recognized and interesting, in line with the values of consumers, and the consumers understand and seek those products that are reflective of those actions. So to us, that's a really, really important part, especially for brands like our Horizon Organic product, where we talk a lot about the farmers with whom we work, or with things like So Delicious, the brand we have, where we just started with a plant-based bottle for packaging. The second part for us is also measuring, and we were talking this morning in the previous panel, there was someone from CDP, obviously very important for us. For us, we are part of CDP also, but we started with another piece, which is we were formed in 2017 in the US. Danone North America was actually formed in 2017 as a public benefit corporation. And that is just a legal entity, legal framework. The next thing that we did is in 1 year we were able to achieve B Corp certification, and that is administered by B Lab, which is based in Philadelphia, and it's over 200 questions that we have to figure out the answers to, and for a company about our size is about $5.5 billion with numerous facilities. There was a lot of data to measure and to report, and to reach that 85 score on the B Lab scoring. So quite important for us.
Certainly, yeah.
Well, all big companies nowadays do produce a sustainability report at the end of the year. And I'd like to launch a new idea that I have for the past 2 or 3 years, which is to integrate sustainability in the accounting tools. I'm talking about the profit and loss report. I'm talking about the balance sheet. Until we do that, it will be very difficult to get all the financial world really focused on it. But if you can prove through your accounting tools that thanks to sustainability, you increase the value of your building, you increase the value of your business, then we're going to really be taken seriously. I'll just give you one example. I was talking about the electricity case that I had at the hotel. Well, we saved about $120,000, a year just on electricity. We bought bulbs for $60,000. So the $60,000 extra that we saved every year, or let's say the second year it was already $120,000, never appear as a sustainability action, or just because we are sustainable that we save that money. So it's very important to show the financial world that it's thanks to that culture that you really increase the bottom line.
No, I think that's an important point to make a really tangible connection, but also in the metric that clearly makes the most sense at the end of the day and is the most powerful. In talking about, is there anything you wanted to add there, Hans?
Yeah, if I
Actually,
may.
yes.
How many of you know what fair trade is? Wow, very impressive. Thank you. So for us, success is when companies, when we can show companies that fair trade is a good vehicle to achieve some or many of their sustainable goals, their sustainability goals, their corporate social responsibility initiatives. That's one measure of success to us. To me, and the dearest one to my heart is how are farmers doing? Are they receiving at least the cost of their production? So, for example, nowadays, as you know, a couple of blocks away from here, a pound of coffee is around 90 cents, right? The production cost of a pound is about 1.45. So farmers, for each pound they're selling, they're losing money. And that means hunger. And it's urgent. So for us, what percentage of their production is being sold under fair trade terms is really important to us. Coffee is about 35%. Cocoa is about 40%. So there's a lot of space in which we can improve things. And the third success factor for us is you consumers. We were speaking about the decisions of consumers, their values. I appreciated that so much, right? If you can, if you, by finding the market fair trade, feel that that product is fulfilling your values and you're making a decision with that purchase, to us that means success as well.
Certainly. Well, I think an important point to address here too is like actually in trying to implement these things in your organization and make them happen and make that big dramatic shift that we keep hearing about, right? Like this massive turn that everything's going to have to make as a society. What do you encounter as the biggest challenge within your organization in making that big change that we need to see?
Well, there are quite a few roadblocks. Sometimes it starts with the employees in the hotel industry again, but you know, where they think, well, what's in it for me? Or particularly in New York, I would say, but you know, what do I get out of it? You know, I work hard, I get, you know, a bit of money at the end of the month, but why would I do an extra effort, you know? So you really have to prove to them that it's worth it. Like for instance, in a hotel, you have, you know, you have all these used soaps and toiletries. So there's a great company called Global Soap, actually Clean the World, and they now are collecting all the used soaps from all hotels around America and sanitizing them and then sending them to Africa, to Asia, or even to some areas here in America. So if you can show the staff that, you know, this is worth doing, then they will really believe in it and they will understand. But the customers as well, as I said earlier, you have to educate them in a way. And of course, the financial world, as I was saying, I was, you know, always bumping head with them because it's important to prove that you can really make money out of it. And here in New York, we're quite lucky. There's NYSERDA, there's Con Edison. Actually, they do give grants to buildings to reduce, to be more energy efficient. So one year, I remember about 5 years ago, they had about $350 million to spend to just donate to companies which wanted to be more energy efficient. So these are the type of things that you have to be able to know in order to, you know, kick these roadblocks.
Certainly. Anything to add there in terms? Yeah.
Yeah, for us, the biggest challenge is we have made a public commitment to be basically carbon neutral around 2050 or so. And when we look at our portfolio, we have pretty healthy, pretty good for you products. But in terms of carbon footprint, for example, taking our dairy products, we know that the biggest contributor to the greenhouse gas emissions of a cup of yogurt or a gallon or a half gallon of milk is the cow. And so, you know, we face that problem or that reality straight on. So what we decided to do was that we needed to engage with the farmers. Traditionally, in most places in the U.S., companies like ours buy from co-ops, and they may or may not know exactly who the farmers are. They certainly don't have the direct relationship with the farmers. So today we have about, in North America has about 600 farmers that produce milk every day for us, so that we can make milk or yogurt or cheese or things like that with that milk. So we decided to engage with them, develop long-term relationships, and engage in a program for about half of our conventional milk. We have a program now called Cost Plus, and you were mentioning the livelihood of farmers. So for us, Cost Plus means that if you're a farmer and you decide to engage with us for several years, we will commit to not only paying your costs as a farmer, but also we guarantee on top of that a margin. So that allows the farmer to not be worried about putting food on the table. They know exactly what the margin they will get. It's not related to the price of milk, whether the world price or whether China buys milk, China does not buy milk, etc., like that. And that allows us also to implement with them. They are still the owner of their farms, they are still the owners of the cows, but implement measures with regard to animal welfare, with regard to use of pesticides, herbicides, with regard to the use of energy, and with regard to use of specific feed that may actually reduce the carbon footprint of the cow. So things like that where we shift the risk to the farmer from them to us. We will try to talk about those things also with our consumers, but it's a big change.
When you were, I just have a quick question to that, because I do think it is important to address specific crops and things we're talking about here. But as far as feed goes, so much of this country and so many other countries, like the industrial system we have is set up for feed for animals, right? So what are you looking at as an alternative that hopefully is better than corn or some of the other grains that are out there?
It depends. I mean, first of all, it depends if you're talking conventional milk or if you're talking organic milk. So there are quite big differences. Obviously, for organic milk, it has to be organic feed, and it has to be also pasture. So that's a very different way. For the conventional milk, you can actually produce corn and soy and mix the ration with other things like alfalfa and other sources. So you can produce these in a very sustainable way. You can also introduce, you were talking about biodiversity. One of the programs we have with the suppliers of feed is biodiversity buffers, where we maintain habitats for pollinators and things like that. So we have all kinds of programs on those.
So actually diversifying the farms themselves.
Yeah, and reducing till. So we have mostly no-till, and meaning you don't actually plow, and also making sure that we have crop rotation as well as cover crops on fallow land.
Maybe this is something Hans could respond to as well, and Noemi, maybe you too, but how do the farmers respond to that? Do they feel like in building on what Hervé said in terms of, making it worth it for people, do they feel like, do they see this as a resource for them, or what makes it worth their time to do it? What's the incentive?
Under the cost-plus model, again, we shift the risk away from them. So they're quite interested because they are still the owner of the land, and they are still very interested in that. So if we come with science and say, this is, you choose to do whatever you want to do, but this will help. And we show, right now we just launched also a huge program on soil health, where we're partnering with Ohio State University as well as Cornell University. We have right now 26,000 acres in the US that are under that program. We're going to go this year to 45,000 acres. So you're starting to make a difference in showing data where we're going to change the way the soil behaves. And our big thing is to go into carbon sequestration with the soil.
Totally. Maybe we've talked about this a little bit too, and also making the connection that a lot of people don't, that booze is an agricultural product. And a lot of it takes a lot of product to go into a bottle. So do you want to speak to also what Pernod Ricard is doing?
Yeah. So exactly, like a lot of people think that vodka, for example, is like a chemical liquid, but they really don't realize that the ingredients we use are water and wheat. So we own some of our land to produce our beautiful brands, but we also supply from numerous suppliers. And we partner with each of them to really ensure that they use sustainable practices. And because we own some of our land too, we test and learn at home before sharing with others. And so we have programs all over the world to really change the agricultural world.
Do you mind if I share one of our roadblocks?
No, please go.
So one of my this is so encouraging, thank you. One of my roadblocks is we don't want to pay for sustainability. It's as clear as that. Last year I was in the World Economic Forum, and everyone said, yeah, sustainable this, sustainable the other, there's not enough, sustainable this, the other. It is simple. It is available, but we don't want to pay for it. Again, 35% of the coffee that's produced under fair trade terms, that means it is sustainable for the families, it is sustainable for the environment. It's very close to organic, is available, but so only 35% sold under fair trade terms. The same with cocoa. So companies, in a way, are with their hands tied behind their backs because we consumers don't want to pay more for sustainable. but we demand it, but we don't want to. And I'm sorry, this sounds very harsh, but it talks about my purchasing habits as well. When we go to the supermarket and we see a pound of bananas for 45 cents, for goodness sakes, who's subsidizing that? That's a fruit that's produced in the tropics, a huge supply chain, very complex cooling systems, etc., etc. Who's subsidizing that? It's the farmer. Back to your point of risk. Thank you. We spoke about this morning, this afternoon, early afternoon, about investments. So for farmers, as you well know, it's not just climate change the issue. It's not just market. It's volatility of markets. For example, for a bag of coffee that has 7 transactions, only one of those transactions is physical. The rest is hedge, is risk management, is banks or mutual funds coming in. And I'm not criticizing, but it's just to remind ourselves of all the risks that the farmers are facing every day, which is not just nature. So in a nutshell, one of my roadblocks is our lack of desire to pay. But I'm sure if we better understand, we will pay. So these conversations and these initiatives that you're bringing in are so encouraging.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to switch gears a little bit from that, but like keeping with the human element too. I feel like everybody on this panel is implicated in the conversations around packaging and plastics. It's no secret here at all that our world has a plastic crisis right now, and we're well on track to have more plastic in the oceans than actual fish. And it spans from the hospitality industry to booze, to dairy, et cetera, to packaged lettuce. But how are your organizations trying to innovate and surmount the plastic problem? Do you want to start, Philippe, since Denon? Just to avoid the elephant in the room.
We're a huge user of plastic, yes. So first of all, let's not forget, as I said earlier, that plastic is there to help us deliver the products to you safe. And it's very important to realize a lot of people think that glass is a great product to have, but actually it costs a lot of money to haul that glass, even empty, and to recycle it. And right now, unfortunately, there's really no value in recycled glass at this point. What's important to realize for Danone is that we have made in October last year, 2018, a commitment to be 100% recyclable, reusable, compostable packaging, and going fully circular in terms of our packaging. Now that's a big, tall order, and you have many angles. The goal for us is to really make sure that we develop the supply chain so that we have recycled content in our products. Right now, Evian, for example, sold here in the US, has 25% recycled content on average, and the brand wants to go to 100% recycled content. And obviously that will be to go into the closed loop part. So again, those things are, I mentioned that we also introduced the plant-based bottle for So Delicious. That's another piece where we're able to innovate in that way.
Is it a compostable bottle, or is it something that can enter the existing plastic recycling?
It's an HDPE bottle, so it can enter the recycling system, yes. Yeah. But it's not sourced from oil, but from plants.
Gotcha. And then we talked about this a little, yeah.
Yeah, because for us, so 1% of our packaging is plastic and the rest is glass. We prefer glass for many reasons, but we try to actually lower the carbon footprint of the glass because it's heavier, so we really try to add recycled content in it and also to lightweight the bottles. But we have challenges through what you were saying before, because to actually integrate recycled content, you need to get the recycled content. And if you look at the US, where 10 million tons of glass are disposed every year, only 33% of these are recycled. So we need to work with suppliers, we need to work with municipalities to actually change the whole recycling ecosystem. But for us, packaging, the plastic packaging, that 1%, we still believe we have responsibility. We have the same target. I think we're maybe signatory of the same commitment from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, the new plastic economy, to really make all of our plastic packaging recyclable, compostable, or reusable by 2025. But we also have promotional items. You all know plastic straws and all the noise that has been done last year. So we banned plastic straws before all of these scandals around plastic straws. And what was really interesting is to see how innovation can get out of those bans. For example, we're using here in the US a company called Lollyware doing seaweed straws. And they look like plastic, but they're seaweed, so they're compostable.
They're from New York City, just to say.
Yeah. And so, yeah, packaging for plastic, but also promotional items. And our next big fight are going to be plastic cups for all the events. I'm sure you've been to music festivals and everything. So we are trying to find other entrepreneurs that can find good alternatives and that are biodegradable.
And I can only encourage you to go fast because the hotels are on the receiving end. I mean, we not only do we have a lot of packaging, ourselves, but as well we collect everything from our customers. So can you imagine when someone comes for 4 or 5 days vacation and goes to Macy's, Bloomingdale's, and Saks and comes back with dozens of bags and they end up in the room because they don't, of course, they unpack everything, put them in their suitcase and leave. But we end up with all this. So it's really, for us, it's very, very important as well to really have a very thorough recycling solution as well. But I can, just 2 things. One of the first thing is I think it's up to us, all of us. When you go to the supermarket, please tell them not to give you 2 plastic bags, or try to put things together in one bag, and use recyclable bags as well. But the other thing I'd like to give to the audience as well, there's a fantastic foundation called Oceanic Global. It's Oceanic Global, not Ocean Global, but Oceanic Global. And if you go to their website, they give you the resources or the sources of products which are recyclable or recycled or definitely not all plastic. So really encourage you to have a look at that. Plus, the founder is a young French woman who lives between New York and Hong Kong. So they're really very, very much into that, and it's very useful for hotels and restaurants, because as you were saying, the famous plastic straw. When I hear that Starbucks is going to stop in 2020, I think 21, the straws, the plastic straws, why don't they stop now? I mean, they could already use all the socks they have and then start, using new straws. So I think it's really up to each of us to be very responsible.
Go ahead, Viraj.
Yeah, I was just going to say, reiterate what some of the panelists already said, is that not a day that goes by in our organization where we're not talking about packaging. our whole company is rooted in environmental sustainability, yet we've got the single-use plastic that our product is delivered in, but it's really a function of delivering that transparent, safe product for the customer that's not going to waste. Now, a head of lettuce is something that's still transpiring, and it's living, breathing, and you put it in cardboard, you put it in paper, you put it in different types of thinner gauge plastic, and then the quality of the product is compromised, and then so we're no longer solving this issue around supply chain efficiency and reducing food waste. So it's a very complicated issue for us, and we're really looking to our suppliers and really learning more and more about different types of material science, of what sort of materials can be produced actually with a smaller environmental footprint than the norm. We did look at some plant-based plastics before, but we were turned off by it once we learned how much energy was going into it, how much genetically modified subsidized corn was going into it, how much water and fertilizer was going into it, and then it was not actually able to go into the municipal waste stream in cities like New York or Chicago because the infrastructure is not there to be dealing with these compostable plastics. So it's a very complex issue. What's getting a lot of media attention with the public is really the waste, right? Things getting into the oceans, which is critical for our marine habitat, biodiversity. However, what's not getting a lot of information is the inputs that are going into it. I've even read some studies around virgin plastic is actually using less carbon emissions in some cases than highly recycled plastic. So these are very complicated issues, and I'm really relying, I hope, on the supply chain of packaging, like the seaweed, for example, right, to come up with some examples of innovation that can really help.
Yeah, Philippe?
Can I just one more piece? I think there's another angle. I completely agree with you in that there's one other angle. in the United States, we have a major issue of infrastructure, or recycling infrastructure, lack thereof. If you look at a place like New York City, our infrastructure is pretty good, thanks to a major recycling program here. However, throughout the rest of the nation, it is not. So we've invested, like many other companies, it's not only us, we've invested $5.25 million over 5 years into the closed loop fund, and it's open for investors, any investors that want to go there. And it's the focus of the closed loop fund is to develop infrastructure for recycling, as well as coming up with new technology for sortation of the different types of plastic that there are. So the closed loop fund, very large companies are investors: Walmart, 3M, Colgate, Danone, Nestle Waters, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really an amazing program. It's based here in New York, and it's the former mayor of New York City, former deputy mayor in charge of sanitation, who started the fund.
Recycling is so highly localized, right? And while we're on it, before we jump to our concluding points, I do think it's important for us also to address waste here and that sort of balance too. I don't have to cite, the statistics that have been repeated over and over again, but there's a tremendous amount of waste in the food supply chain that's kind of just been built in over time. And maybe, Hans, starting with you, we can start on the farmer end of things and where waste can come from, but also speak about how you're trying to help mitigate it throughout till it ends up in that final product.
So our farmers are business people, by the way. So they're extremely efficient. They're co-ops, they're organized. So each ounce of waste is something they cannot sell, and it's money that they don't get. So trust me that in terms of waste, they're very, very cognizant and understand and reduce waste. Second is there's a big push, and it's been the push for fair trade farmers for a long while, to improve quality. So it's not just complying with the fair trade standards and not just producing outputs. It's producing it with the highest quality possible. So that's another way of reducing waste. And third, back to your point of plastic and all the other waste and pesticides, et cetera, they're so aware that they're responsible of nature. It's not that they're just complying with a list of things. It's because they live thanks to nature and really close to nature. I came back from Colombia, and there's a marvelous indigenous group in which they believe that nature is Mother Nature, and they're the stewards of that nature. So back to the point of waste and contamination and pollution, it's their nature. So they're really, really aware of that.
For example, when we distill our products, I will take the example of vodka. We use wheat, and we actually do not want to create waste after distillation. So that byproduct of wheat that we call stillage, it's kind of a brown paste. Doesn't look very attractive to us, but it's very good for animal feed. So we actually take back this tillage to the farmers around our production site. And with just Absolut vodka produced in Sweden, we feed 40,000 cows and 200,000 pigs every day. So we try to create, it's the circular mindset, new products with waste.
Sure. And in the hospitality industry, I mean, it's all over the place potentially. So when you're talking to hotels in New York City that see such a huge volume, right, of tourists who come through, what are you telling them in order to cut back?
No, I'd like to speak to City Hall actually, and because I'm always happy in a way when there's a new law or regulation, and it happened. We now have a law for food and beverage outlets to go composting. I started 10 years ago to have digesters in the hotel. So with digesters, it can go both ways as well, because the food waste is transformed into grey water in 24 hours. Now in New York, there's no law yet or regulation about the quality of the water that you transfer back. So I'd never really insist, but if someone wants to do it, I really encourage them to do so. What we do in the restaurant and in the hotel business in order to reduce our carbon footprint as well is to use local farmers, because these farmers will be more cognizant of the packaging as well. That we don't, they'll work with us to give us recycled packages, or they will just drop their food and they produce and keep the packaging with them. So that's our way as well of reducing packaging in our properties.
And then the composting element is such a big part of it too. I mean, I don't want to harp on that too much, but just cities in and of themselves, and building on the panel that was before us previously, that's a huge impact that organizations can have on reducing their carbon output, et cetera, and diverting that to something else. Well, I think we don't have that much time left, but they did want us to walk away with some, I think, action points that you all would like to share with others in pursuing the sustainability work. So if you could each give 3 takeaway points, Eri, you've provided many, I feel like, with us, but advising others to actually take meaningful action at whatever scale they're at, I'd love to hear them. Yeah, Eri.
Well, there are many points, but number one, I think it has to start at the head. The board, the CEO or the general manager of a company has to be convinced that this is the right thing to do, for the world, but as well for their own business. It has to start there. Otherwise, there are many roadblocks already right there. Second thing is, of course, measurements. And I can only encourage, I was really thrilled to see Liz Kingo earlier from Global Compact, because I can really encourage you all to look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Each of them is really relevant. They really cover the planet, and I cannot wait until they become a global certification, actually. And I just want to leave you with a thought. You know, there's a wonderful poet from America. Her name is Linda Ellis. You can find the poem online. It's called The Dash. In business, we always talk to our staff about legacy. You know, what is your legacy, even to a room attendant, to a doorman, to a manager? You know, what will be your professional legacy the day you move on? Well, The Dash is the story of a man who is reading the eulogy of a friend of his who just died, and she passed away. And he talks about her life between the year she was born and the year she died. And in between these 2 dates, there's a tiny, 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 tiny dash. And that tiny dash represents your entire life. So when you leave this room, I'm just leaving that to you. Think about your dash.
I would suggest to start even for any small action, because very often we're scared not to do like a full strategy or a big program because we don't have all of the answers. But any small action can have an impact. So I think it's really important to start somewhere. Then involving the top management, definitely, but also involve the key business people in different functions that are going to have a role to play. Operations, procurement, you have many different departments that need to really play a role. And it's to start with a little of poesy, even if it's not a real poesy. If you involve people, that's how you're going to make a change, because there's a saying to say, tell me and I forget, show me and I'll remember, involve me and I'll understand. So that's really how you can make a difference, I think.
Well, reflecting on the beginning of this conference, this symposium, I think you have to be bold. You have to be disruptive. For example, I encourage all of you, all the companies here, to become B Corps within the next 3 years. That would be really cool. The second thing is, whatever you do, you always have a supply chain. You supply a thing for you, and then you distribute things. Most of companies do that. So involve the entire supply chain. That's really important. And the last thing is that whatever decision you make every day, always consider the impact that you have on your practices. And for us, it even goes when we make an investment in a new line, a new plant, a new product. We calculate the carbon footprint, we calculate the emissions, and that is part of the equation, and we actually impose a carbon price internally to that investment.
One key metric that's used in investment and finance circles is market size or total addressable market. And I think something with sustainability, your total addressable market is the size of the human population. You've got 9 billion. It's the largest total addressable market, right? And so, a lot of companies, consumer packaged good companies, have had success when they really show a larger total addressable market. Many of these plant-based meat companies are not just marketing to vegetarians, which make up 5% of the global population, but they are marketing to the entire population, the entire eating population. You know, market value goes up, valuations and things go up, which is a key metric, right? So for sustainability, as industry leaders, as business owners, not just focusing on environmentalists or tree huggers or saying, you know, 5% of the population cares about sustainability. No, focus on the entire population because it's going to have a major impact. And then to that point, people, you know, young people coming out of universities today, high schools today, have had exponential more exposure to sustainability issues and sustainability education than previous generations, right? Every year that graduates has had more exposure to these issues in the previous year. So it's going to become a necessity to attract talent from a human resource standpoint to have ethics and have a business model and values that are centered around natural resource use and the environment. Every day we're interviewing people as a rapidly growing business. You know, we're adding 2 or 3 people a week to our company, and every single candidate talks about sustainability. So I think those are really important key takeaways.
So companies, the first one, companies, we're at your total disposal to have a conversation on how can we help you address or solve or meet your sustainability, some of them, all of your sustainability goals. And please don't forget that in France, population is really, really aware of what fair trade is. So fair trade has a brand recognition of about 90%. That means 9 out of 10 consumers recognize the mark. Second, for us consumers, we're part of the solution. And our decisions really count. Our values, if our values drive our consumption. When you drink coffee, ask the caterer, where's that coffee coming from? Is there deforestation behind that coffee? Are farmers being paid at least the minimum price? Which is a proxy for the cost. And the third one is very simple and very practical. Today at 5 o'clock, there'll be sort of a get together to close this fabulous convention and discussion. Eat Divine chocolate. 40% of the ownership of Divine belongs.
Such a food industry answer.
I'm sorry.
It's great.
Yeah. So about 40% of the ownership of Divine is held in the hands of the farmers who produce that cocoa in Cote d'Ivoire. Please drink Tulsi tea, organic Tulsi tea, which is another fair trade wonderful partner. And if I may say, enjoy some of the ethical vodka coming from quinoa from Bolivia, which is spectacular. So, and it's very tasty. I've tried it, I have to say. So on behalf of the 1.3 farmers that I work for and we work for in Fair Trade, I'm most grateful for having the opportunity to be here to remind ourselves that the supply chain is something very abstract and there's families behind it. And to Hanako and Lindsay, thank you so much again for inviting us.
I should just add that there's also going to be sparkling from Spain, Cava, which is the only winery in Spain to be carbon neutral. So you'll enjoy that too.
Oh, no, good to know. And Q&A, so we have time for questions? Excellent. Do we have any questions? Right here, yeah. Is there? Where? This gentleman?
Hello, thank you for this panel. It was very, very interesting, and to have different companies, different size of companies. I have a question for Danone and Pernod Ricard, because we all see a paradox talking about globalization and sustainability. Because, for example, we all know this very famous and very good water, which is Evian. So I'm going to be a little provocative. Sorry, but my thought is, how can you be more sustainable when you still sell more and more Evian coming from the French Alps, when you think about all the plastic bottles to bring this water, all the shipping, so the carbon footprint of Evian. So I would like, it's the same question for Pernod with cognac, of course, or Ricard, even if Ricard is not very famous in the US. But you know, last time, you know, I was with my kids in a park, and he was thirsty, so we had different, bottles of water. And my son, which is a big fan, who is a big fan of Evian, told me, "Yeah, I would like an Evian, okay." And I was in New York, and I said, "But that doesn't make sense because you have different, spring, very good also water, American spring waters, and you want only Evian. It doesn't make sense. Even it's very good, of course, and that's not the issue. But I would like to know, how do you face this issue? Because I think it's a big issue for you. And do you have a ranking of sustainable brands inside your company? Because, for example, you could say, well, we encourage local brands, in different countries instead of increasing the sales of Evian all around the world. How do you face this issue?
Yes, so we get this question quite a bit, as you can imagine, so that's okay. First of all, we're not increasing the sale of Evian worldwide because actually, as you know, it's from one place and only in Evian. And we're actually limited in terms of the supply, so it's slightly increasing, but not much. So that's not the issue. I think the packaging is the issue, and the transport. So exactly what you said. For the packaging, we do have a commitment to be 100% recycled content for the bottles, meaning that no additional fossil fuel will have been used to actually produce the bottles. And we're also investing in the recycling, as I mentioned here in the U.S. with a closed loop fund, and trying to get that plastic back and educating consumers. So we're trying to really address that piece. Now, in terms of why Evian versus why ship it over to the U.S., it's a little bit like my colleague here from Pernod Ricard. It's a product, we like to deliver it. We do take responsibility for the packaging, and we do take responsibility for the transport. But by the way, we also have contributed, I forgot to say that, we've done some planting of mangroves in West Africa to actually gain carbon credits to actually apply them to the Evian brand. So that's the answer to your first question. In terms of local brands, yes, we have local brands that are not Evian, obviously. They're not water because we decided to no longer be producing bottled water in the United States about a little bit over 10 years ago. But we had local waters, yes, and we sold that back to different companies locally. On the water side, we have local brands. I would say Horizon Organic is a local brand for milk, and Dannon is a local brand for here.
And yeah, to add on what you're saying, so our products are coming from some terroirs. So we're selling those terroirs across the globe, and we know there's a footprint. But what's important to raise is that it's 30% of the carbon footprint of a product comes from the transport. So the major issue is actually agriculture. That's where you have the biggest carbon emissions. So because we have to prioritize, we're currently really addressing the agricultural carbon emissions. But then we're also working with other companies because we're not alone for clean shipping. We ship mostly by boat, which is much better than planes. So we really try to change how we ship our products. And there's also carbon offsetting, as you said, for shipping. But those terroirs that we sell are coming just from one place. So we're really working on the footprint.
Yeah, and Evian is also shipped by boat, just to be clear.
Another question? One last question. I see one right here.
Hello. How are you all doing?
Well.
Doing all right? Good. So my name's Candace, and I love hearing some of your companies talk about the fact that you've made goals to be recyclable or reusable or in a bioplastic or biodegradable by 2025 or 2030, depending on the company. So I, too, will be a little bit provocative here. But two questions I have is, I've seen some data, I work in the recycling industry, that has basically shown that there's not enough plastic in the recycling economies today to meet all of the goals that corporations like Danone and Pernod Ricard have set for 2025 or 2030. So how do you plan to be recyclable by 2025 if we don't have enough material to meet that goal today? And then secondly, the other question I have is, when you're thinking about moving to something like a bioplastic, one of the things that I often run into when I'm trying to consult companies like you on what to do, because it's complex, right? It's so tough. Like, one decision equals a good here and a bad there, is the infrastructure or lack thereof for bioplastics once we move to them. And if we move everything that we're currently using into bioplastics, the infrastructure, most composters, can they break it down? Yes. Do they want to? No, because it's going to dilute their overall sort of output. So in thinking about, obviously, the fact that the end-of-life solution is a very small part of the overall life cycle assessment of a given product, still curious what you would say to kind of those questions. Yeah.
So I'll start, even if plastic is very little for us. But just to tell you, in terms of recyclable, we only use PET bottles in terms of plastic, and this is recyclable. So for the target of 2025, there's no issue. I think you're referring to recycled content. And recycled content is another thing, because as I said for glass before, we actually need to get this recycled content from municipalities for the US, for example. And so that's why we are part of coalitions. So here in the US, we're part of a glass coalition, because that's, for us, 85% of our packaging, to actually make sure that there's more recycling infrastructure to get the content that then we integrate in our packaging. So I'm sure for plastic it's the same. Because for wine and spirits, in terms of recycled content for plastic, just to tell you, we cannot go as high as water can go, for example, because when you have higher alcohol content in a plastic bottle, there's a risk of migration of the microplastic into the liquid. So that's why we cannot have a target of 100% recycled content for plastic. And we're doing research to know how much content we can integrate for PET.
So I know we're short on time, but to answer your question on recycled content, we actually, as a company, are supportive of legislation currently being discussed in California to mandate recycled content for example, PET, but within a certain time frame, obviously, because we need the infrastructure, thus our investment in closed loop fund that I mentioned earlier. I want to make sure that we make a distinction on your second point about the bioplastics. So you have to be careful. There are certain plastics that are polluting, as you said, the stream of PET or the stream of HDPE. What we're trying to do is the HDPE plant bottle I was mentioning, that is HDPE. It's not polluting the rest of the HDPE. It's just the source for that HDPE is plant. That's quite important. And the final thing is we have, as Danone, invested, like other companies, in Loop Industries out in Canada, which is actually, it's a chemical process where you actually go back to the monomers of PET, and then that will provide basically create new PET based on the recycling part. So you may actually get to the 100% in your case.
I think that's all we have time for. Yeah, thank you.
And please just reach the gallery, which is up the floor. And we're going to have like about